going to be a complex agreement. Russia has presented it as INDC. They have presented their carbon management plan together with 39 other countries. I, cannot stand here and say any one of those is absolutely, the best ambition that could have been put on the table. That is not so. In fact, we already know that the sum total of all of those carbon management plans, of which we expect to get at least 2 times as many by the time of Paris, the sum total will not put us on the path of staying within the below 2 temperature goal that governments have agreed to and that science has suggested. So the part of the complexity of the Paris Agreement is how do you construct something that receives and acknowledges all of those carbon management plans as being a baseline, a first step, if you will, but also how do you construct the way forward that treats those only as a first step, as a down payment, if you will, and then takes everyone together in an increasing collaborative manner toward the final ultimate destination, which is the very difficult but absolutely necessary balance between the greenhouse gases that we will have and the natural absorption of the planet. That is a very difficult to attain and even difficult to conceive right now that we would get to that point, but it's the only way out. I think the implicit assumption was that the problem was in the future and we don't know if we have the solutions. And I think what has fundamentally changed is that the problem is no longer in the future, the problem is in the present, and furthermore, the solutions are in the present. So we do have the technologies, we have the capital, we have a growing number of regulations and legislations in place, and we have a very interesting good mood developing internationally that is basically saying, okay, actually, we are going to get to an agreement. So quick correction on your introduction. It's not the possibility of a climate deal that we're going to Paris. We are going to get an agreement. And countries, quick correction there. The conversation now is not, are we going to get to an agreement, but rather, how are we going to do this? And the complexity is actually now the challenge. It's not about managing resistance, it's about managing the complexity. How do you bring all of the components into a coherent whole, which above all, bottom line, that agreement needs to potentialize collaboration across countries, inside countries, across the different levels, across sectors. It's about how do you maximize collaboration, because I think the universal truth has now become very evident. We're all better off with climate action ASAP than without. So the question now for Paris is, how do we do that?
So cheap natural gas is driven by fracking. So is Christiana Figueres, is fracking a good thing if you want to get the world off coal, which is the dirtiest of fossil fuels?
Well, I think you have to see this as a gradual progress here, This is about avoiding abrupt changes. Nobody is benefited by continuing a business model, a country model, an economic model that drives us to a very dangerous edge. It's about, yes, these companies, I fully agree with Bill, these companies, these countries want to have time to transition. You can't blame them. Everybody needs time to transition. It's about the collective good and the collective wisdom about organizing, setting a new direction now so that we can then begin to transition in a thoughtful, planned way instead of having abrupt changes that are of no interest to those countries, to those corporations, to anyone. And in that sense, oil and gas does represent an interesting transition fuel if they invest now into all of the technologies that will bring down even the emissions from oil and gas. They have to step up to the plate.
Russia is also a state that's very dependent on natural gas. They've submitted their plan. Is it an aggressive plan? And because Russia is at odds with the United States a lot these days, is it going to play ball and be supportive in this context?
The fantastic thing about this, and it's honestly nothing short of miraculous, is that there is not a single country, Russia included, that is not playing ball. Yes, they're all playing the ball to their own interest. That's what they have to do. But there's no country that has said they want to be exempted from this agreement. In fact, all of them understand that it is in their interest to cover everyone. By definition, that's going to be a complex agreement.
We haven't talked about China. The U.S.-China deal was thought to be a game changer for the two biggest emitters, the biggest historic emitter, the biggest current emitter. So Christiana Figueres, how did the U.S.-China deal change the dynamics for the Paris climate negotiations?
You know, it was very important. It came just before the Lima meeting last year, so it was very strategically timed. And of course, when you have the two big gorillas actually filing down their nails and saying, you know what, this is one area in which we can and we must collaborate. And it's hard to find other areas in which China and the United States are willingly engaged in being interested in maximizing each other's impact, both separately from each other as well as collectively. That is a very, very important sign because it signaled two things. A, that the two highest emitters are taking this very seriously. B, that they're all committed to doing something about it in their own countries. And C, that they're actually interested in collaborating. And that message about collaborating across national territories is one that is really very seriously being considered now and is one of the most important how questions. How do we actually do that? Because the sum total of the individual efforts is not going to be enough.
Bill Reilly, the U.S.-China climate deal also took away one of the biggest arguments in the United States, which was, well, we don't have to do anything because China's going to blow it all away anyway. So how did it affect the domestic dynamic?
The China move was very important. Former Secretary James Baker, who himself delivered his first speech as Secretary of State about climate change, and it was he who articulated the no regrets policy that characterized the early part of the George H.W. Bush administration. But he has written that without China's moving on this issue, it would create a very substantial competitive disadvantage to the economy of the United States. And therefore, there's no basis for our cutting back. That argument is being eroded very fast by moves that the Chinese are making. Now we can say that the Chinese have agreed to cap. It's not, we've not gotten a home run here. Let's face it, it's going to take a long time. If they cap their emissions in 2030, there will be a lot of damage done in the meantime. Having gone to China regularly with the China Sustainable Energy Program that the Packard Foundation initiated some years ago, the Energy Foundation runs, I am impressed that the impacts are perceived now in China to a greater degree than they used to be. There used to be a pattern, and I went to these annual meetings, that if you use the word climate change or global warming, suddenly everything came to a halt and you got a spiel from the senior Chinese present who reminded you that
sounds
the problem,
like Florida.
Well, it's true. We have places in this country where that is quite right. But that's no longer true. They no longer tell you at great length that you created the problem, you have to solve it, and it's all your fault. That's progress. It may not sound like much, but it is. I think that they will be able to go farther, faster, as they begin to exploit some of the technologies which they themselves have advanced in manufacturing, for example, photovoltaics. I put photovoltaics in my house in 2006 and then again last year. They cost 50% less last year for a panel. That's huge progress in a relatively short period of time, and it reinforces the point that Christina made, that the solutions are now closer to hand than they ever were.
I think what we're seeing is a very interesting push-pull evidence here, where you're seeing from increasing regulation, legislation, et cetera, you're seeing a push, and certainly from the increased awareness of impacts. But you're also beginning to see, as Bill was saying, a pull from the customer base. There's much more expectation now of responsibility, corporate responsibility. So you see the likes of IKEA, Google, Apple, going 100% renewable, saying we want to produce our own renewable energy. Mm-hmm. Why? Because their customers want them to be more responsible. So there's a very helpful, I think, a virtuous cycle being created here of push and pull, both from the regulation side, more regulations now than ever were, 800 already on the table across the world, but also the very important pull so that corporations have become now are becoming much more aware of the fact that it is in their own interest. And fundamentally, I think that is the really huge shift between where we were 5 years ago and now, that no matter what level you look at, if you look at countries, if you look at states, if you look at cities, if you look at corporations, they're all beginning to understand, as you were pointing out, that it is in their self-interest to do this. Yes, there's a huge threat. I'm not going to minimize the threat. But right next to that, there's a huge opportunity for countries, for cities, for companies. And that narrative has become, is starting now to take real hold, so that it's not just a narrative. There is actually a fundamental economic imperative that is being played out.
Christiana Figueres, the heads of major European oil companies wrote you a letter recently. What did they say?
They said they want to be part of the solution. They said they want a price on carbon.
Did you fall off your chair when you read this?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I didn't fall off my chair, because it's a very natural evolution of a conversation that we've been having with them. And it's a natural evolution of this process. I go back, right? This is one step in that push-pull where, frankly, oil and gas companies have to be a part of the solution. If they want to have business continuity, it's a very clear choice. Do you want to continue to be a company, or do you not? If you want to have business continuity, you have to get with the program. And you have to understand that we are going into a low-carbon economy. Do you want to contribute to that? Fantastic. Because these oil and gas companies, they have very, very deep pockets, and they have an amazing engineering capacity that is unequaled in any other sector. Once they get those two together and put them at the service of their clients today and tomorrow, this is an unstoppable force.
U.S. companies were notably absent. Chevron, Exxon, why weren't they there? Do you know?
They were invited. They're not ready. They're not ready for, reasons that are probably better known by people who carry a U.S. passport than me. But I don't take that no as a permanent no. I take that as a not yet. I take that as I need more conversation. I need more evidence. I need, even more compelling economic imperative evidence to be put in front of me. So I do not close my door to them. My door has always been open. I am very proud of the fact that I have been talking to all of these companies, and I shall continue to do that, because they have to be part of the solution. We're not going to solve this without them.
Let's talk about Pope Francis. He recently entered the fray on climate. He's done some remarkable things. He said recently that man has slapped nature in the face. He came out very strongly in support of climate on his encyclical. Christiana Figueres, how does this moral voice affect the prospect for a climate deal?
I think it's a very important contribution to the conversation. The moral imperative on climate change has been made for many years, but the clarity and the clarion call from the Pope, who is motivated truly from his sense of justice, is very it's very moving, and it really, I think, it sort of shakes the ground that you stand on. You cannot be untouched by a call like that. We all get up in the morning and look at ourselves in the mirror. No matter what our job is, we all look at ourselves in the mirror, and the first question we should ask ourselves is, what do I really want to do with my life? What do I really want to be my legacy? What kind of a planet am I turning over to my kids, my grandkids? We all do that. It doesn't matter what our profession is. And I think that is what he's calling for. He's saying, okay, ask yourself that question and answer. Because there is a compelling economic imperative that has been made by many other people. But side by side, the question, is this not something that we can all agree to?
Bill Reilly, you had an audience with the Pope a couple of weeks ago. Tell us about that and how this changes the dynamic in the U.S. 30% of Congress is Catholic.
I think it changes it very significantly. The surprise about the Pope's statement, one expected that he would set out the theological underpinnings for stewardship, creation care, and the like, which previous popes have done eloquently. I think the surprise is that his message is on several planes. It's on the plane, certainly, of theology and morality. It also gets very close to the realm of policy and action. It calls out people who are not accepting climate and change and and suggest that indifference or excessive belief in a technical solution or just opposition to the science is unacceptable on a moral plane. That's very consequential, I think. Finally, and one expected this would be true, he has a very heartfelt and affecting statement of concern on the part of the poor and the disproportionate effects that they will suffer.
My question to both of you, which will not be solved at the coming negotiation in Paris, but is 2 degrees Celsius enough? That is almost 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that going to be enough when we do get to making sure we stay under the 2 degrees Celsius?
Christiana Figueres.
A very important question, Holly, and one that is actually very much on the table right now. In fact, the last 2 weeks of negotiations in Bonn had many countries rallying around the 1.5 degree temperature because they feel that although there was a political compromise in Copenhagen to set under 2 and then have 1.5 only be a reference, they feel that under 2 does not guarantee their survival, and they want to raise the political visibility or actually put into political parity 1.5 to under 2. So it is very much of a concern because while in Copenhagen there was that agreement and that compromise, science now has advanced to the point where it is becoming more and more alarming. So to be followed, that conversation, but very difficult.
I would only add to that, Holly, that 2% was a political
2
number.
degrees.
2 degrees was a political number, and business as usual will overreach significantly 2 degrees. I think most people know that. And the sense has been, on the part of a lot of people at least, that, well, let's stay with 2. It was a consensus number at the time, even though it isn't entirely clear how we get there. But we certainly do want to get at least to there. And over time, as Christina suggests, we will find that we have to go farther. But for the moment, I'm not sure that I would agree that dropping 2 degrees or making it even a harder goal to achieve is a good idea until we can at least see how we might get to 2.
When there's a severe economic and political inequality, can consensus work? Are there any ways in Paris that will help deal with the complexities of negotiating the consensus procedure?
Christiana Figueres.
It's very difficult, but it's unavoidable because I hear people tell me, well, 20 countries in the world are responsible for 80% of greenhouse gases, so wouldn't it just be easier to just get 20 countries in the world together around one table and solve the problem? Yes, except what do you do with Vanuatu? Vanuatu was hit by one typhoon, destroyed 70% of its infrastructure. Are you willing to stand there and tell Vanuatu you can't have a voice at the table? No. Everybody has to be there because there is not one country that is not impacted one way or the other. So sorry, folks, we have to do this by consensus. There's no other way.